Because I've always believed in believing in people that believe in themselves. If they believe they can do a job, they can do it.
Mrs. Yawkey asked me to say just a few words about someone that I loved. And above all, he was one of the greatest sportsmen and humanitarians of any era, anywhere, Thomas A. Yawkey. His exceptional good deeds were not confined to Major League Baseball. He contributed immeasurably to charitable work. His long hours devoted to the Jimmy Fund for so many years stands as a great legacy of the man and what he did for the ailing and less fortunate.
When people think of Tom Yawkey, they may immediately recall his passion for baseball and his decades-long ownership of the Boston Red Sox. But there is much more to his story, and it's best told by those individuals who directly witnessed his words and actions and understood the character, priorities, and values by which Tom Yawkey lived his life. The true Tom Yawkey story is one of generosity, empathy, and the many ways in which he changed the lives of friends, colleagues, and even strangers in the communities he called home, New York, Boston, and Georgetown County, South Carolina.
Mr. Yawkey wanted to do things for other people. And he wanted to do them quietly, and he didn't want any thanks for it, and he didn't want people to know about it. It was like he wanted to be anonymous. That's the type of person he was.
He really was a great person, you know, good to the players. He loved the players, and he wanted to be around. He really was a good human being, you know. And then, like I said, he really take care of us. You know, I know he take care of Jazz, take care of me, and take care of most of the people I think he dealing with.
Born in 1903 in Detroit and raised in New York, Tom lost both his parents and his adopted father before the age of 16. The sense of loss that Tom experienced during his formative years molded him into an empathetic and generous man, a man who dedicated his life to sharing his vast resources with those around him.
Tom, because he was parentless, that affected his entire life in what he did both as a private citizen, with the Red Sox, and with the foundation. He was always looking to take care of kids, whether it was the Jimmy Fund, the Terra Hall Home for Boys, which he built in South Carolina. They were very near and dear to him, and his experiences led to that, I believe, led to that cause in his lifetime.
After receiving his elementary and secondary education at the Irving School in Tarrytown, New York, Tom went on to study engineering at Yale University in Connecticut. Following graduation in 1925, he worked for the Yawkey family office in New York City. Tom always loved the game of baseball, a love inspired by his adoptive father's ownership of the Detroit Tigers. In 1933, in the midst of the Great Depression, Tom purchased the storied Boston Red Sox, a team that at the time was struggling in the bottom of the American League.
The worst crisis in America since the Civil War. A quarter of the population is out of work. We need something. We need something, anything to hang on to. We got MGM musicals. We got this new form of jazz called swing. And we have our game of baseball. Great is baseball, the Sporting News said. The national tonic, the reviver of hope, the restorer of confidence. And into Beantown comes Yawkey, and he buys up this team, and he brings it back to the former glory. He starts putting together a winning team and gives us all something that we can hold on to, something that we can care about again, something that we can identify with. And I don't think there's been a break in that identification since.
30-ish-year-old guy with a lot of money, but he bought a ball club that was in the Depression era and at the bottom of the standings. And I think he saw a lot of hard-working people and what they had to go through, and that was one of the things he did when he helped out the workers when they had the great fire here in '34 when they were rebuilding the ballpark.
He had the khaki pants on, the plaid shirt, and I guess they were called docksiders, and he used to go out and play fungo with Yaz just about every day, or Vince Orlando be out there, and a lot of times that Mr. Yawkey come in the clubhouse, half the guys didn't know who he were because that's the way he dressed. He was the type of guy that you see him on the street, you know, you wouldn't think he had a dime.
Beyond his beloved Boston Red Sox, Tom Yawkey also had a great love for the outdoors and for protecting and preserving wildlife. In 1914, Tom's uncle purchased a small tract of land along the shoreline in Georgetown, South Carolina, where Tom would frequently visit as a child. Tom eventually inherited this land, expanded upon it, and ultimately preserved it as a wildlife refuge. Now encompassing more than 24,000 acres, the Tom Yawkey Wildlife Center is considered one of the most meaningful grants to wildlife conservation efforts in North America.
Come to the house, to my father's house, and he would come in normal, just like any common person. You know, you wouldn't think he would be coming in to a local residence like that, but he was a person, was down to earth, and they would sit at the table and drink coffee and talk, and then they would get out and go get in a Bronco and go and probably go fishing, hunting, or whatever. And we just it was almost like a family thing.
Many of the families of employees who work there talk about he offered to pay for their children to go to college if they would accept it, or churches needed an adjacent lot to make their cemetery a little larger. He would give them the money to purchase that, or put a fence up around the playground, lights on the softball fields for a community center. Things like that you hear people talk about all the time, but it always came with the mention of, you know, please don't tell anybody, I want to do this anonymously.
A New York resident throughout his life, Tom Yawkey adopted the city of Boston and his winter home of Georgetown, South Carolina, as his own, and provided financial support, most often in a quiet manner, to both communities in order to help the most vulnerable access health care, realize educational aspirations, and support athletic achievement. Tom was instrumental in the founding of Georgetown Memorial Hospital, which brought access to high-quality health care to this rural and underserved community. Tom was also active in the founding of Georgetown's Tara Hall Home for Boys, and provided personal resources to enable countless young people to achieve their educational goals, always with quiet discretion. Even Tom's most high-profile charitable effort of affiliating the Jimmy Fund with the Boston Red Sox is typically understated. He worked tirelessly alongside Dr. Sidney Farber to establish what is now known as the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, serving as the board chair during the early years of the institute, and providing pivotal funding to bring the institute to fruition. But as those around him had come to expect, when it came to recognition, Tom always put others in the spotlight.
So Tom, after meeting Dr. Farber, who was just a charismatic guy, immediately embraced that notion of helping kids with leukemia. It was just something that was standard for him, as you can see by his modus operandi through life.
For over 40 years, this native New Yorker dedicated his life to the city of Boston, instilling pride in the Boston Red Sox and fielding some of the most competitive and diverse teams in baseball, including the 1967 Impossible Dream Team and the 1975 team which finished first in the American League East. While it is a fact that the Red Sox were the last team in the major leagues to integrate in 1959, Tom brought diverse talent to the Red Sox minor league system long before that. In 1933, the Yawkey-owned Red Sox fielded Mel Almeida, the first Mexican-born player in Major League history. He also pursued a parallel approach in his efforts to recruit black players, with persistent, sustained attempts and offers to black players already playing in the majors. Regrettably, these efforts were not successful. In 1953, the Red Sox signed Earl Wilson to a minor league contract. In 1957, after winning a 5-2 victory, pitching in a spring training game against the team's major league squad, it was determined that Earl Wilson was ready to be promoted. However, his road to the Red Sox Major League squad was interrupted by the military, because within 2 weeks of his win, Earl Wilson received his draft notice from the Army and then enlisted in the Marines. After serving his country for 2 years, Earl Wilson returned to the team in 1959, a week after Pumpsie Green officially integrated the Major League club. In the following 6 years, as a valued member of the Red Sox Major League roster, Wilson became the first black player to pitch a no-hit game in the American League, one of the many high points of his 11-year career in the majors. Tom Yawkey was not a perfect man. He was a human with faults and shortcomings who grew and actively strove to be better throughout his life. And with his personal growth came acknowledgments, accountability, and reckoning about the need to do more, and sincere, humble efforts and progress towards fostering healing, which led to Tom becoming known as a man who treated people of every race with decency and respect. In keeping with his compassionate and caring nature, Tom Yawkey left his philanthropic legacy to the Yawkey Foundation in order to create access and opportunity for those in need, regardless of race, in perpetuity. Tom is fondly remembered by former players, employees, and friends for his personal character, intelligence, gentleness, and charity. But most of all, he's remembered for living up to the highest standard he set for himself, doing what is right, doing it quietly, and never expecting praise for being kind.